Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome back to Tony D's music channel. And today I'll be doing something quite different from what I normally do. Today is a film review of Daytime Revolution, the astonishingly great documentary I just saw, all about the 5 days that John Lennon and Yoko Ono co-hosted the Mike Douglas daytime talk show in February 1972. Now, I had known for several years that John Yoko did this on Mike Douglas' show as co-host of the show, and that they had on these very unconventional guests on the show, but somehow I never saw any of this footage before, and it was astonishing to see. It was astounding. First of all, this was right after John Yoko moved to America in New York, and when they did that, they sold their mansion, Ascot Park, or no, not Ascot, Tittenhouse Park. They sold their mansion to Ringo Starr, and how amazing is that Ringo got that gift from John, and moved to New York City, in New York State, and started becoming friends with the radical left-wing activists in New York, such as Bobby Seale of the Black Panthers and Jerry Rubin of the Yippies, the white liberation group. And this was seen as rather confusing for a lot of fans of the Beatles and fans of John Lennon as a solo artist. And not only did John Lennon and Yoko Ono co-host the show with Mike Douglas, they invited Jerry Rubin and Bobby Seale on this show. Now, seeing the interview with Bobby Seale was an incredible experience. That is the kind of thing that would never, ever happen on a daytime TV show today in 2024. But it happened in 1972. Mike Douglas talked to Bobby Seale the same way he would talk to most people. He was curious and wanted to know about Bobby Seale. He asked about Jerry Rubin's childhood, and he was very nice to Bobby Seale, asking about what sorts of things he did as a member, as the chairman of the Black Panther Party. And they even showed video footage of what the Black Panther Party did back then. And it was so incredible to see this footage of them delivering and donating groceries to, I think, 700 people. Again, this is the kind of thing that the media didn't want you to hear back then. But because of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, this was mentioned on the Mike Douglas daytime talk show. And here is someone who was a communist on this daytime talk show. Nowhere else would this message have gotten out. And now that it's been 50 years since then, the corporate owners of the media don't want that message out. And I also want to mention Jerry Rubin was on this show as well. And not only was Mike Douglas nervous about Jerry Rubin's presence on the show, but John was a bit nervous as well. And Rubin discussed how his dad was a truck driver and his mom was an unhappy housewife. And in his mind, the system in our society destroyed his parents. And it was not mentioned how his parents died, but they were dead at the time of this interview. And of course, that's the kind of rhetoric that you would hear left-wingers and young people use nowadays. The system that destroyed someone's life. And I was absolutely on cloud nine watching this, because in so many ways our modern day culture and our society is so much like the 1970s and 1960s, because that's when you had young people who were serious activists back then and serious about changing society. And that's how we need to be today. And I am just so happy to see young people like that today. And speaking of activism, I was so thrilled to see Ralph Nader on this show in this documentary tonight. I can't remember the first time I knew about Ralph Nader. I knew about his run for president in the year 2000, running in the Green Party, and how he was unfairly blamed for Bush winning when Bush won because of the Supreme Court. And I've seen so many interviews with Ralph Nader, and Ralph Nader is a very inspiring person. And if you do not know this, you should know we have seatbelts in our cars because of Ralph Nader. He was a consumer rights activist. He fought the government back in the 1970s and 60s to force them to pass laws to take care of our citizens, to teach them to know what our government is not doing for us. He had released this book as a guide to young people to be activists and organizers. It was incredible to see John Lennon ask Ralph Nader about this book. And then present day Ralph Nader was in this film. And I believe, if my math is correct, present day Ralph Nader is 89? Since he was 35 when he was in this, on this daytime talk show in 72, which would mean that he was born in 1937. Okay, so that makes him 87 now. 87. Yeah, and he still looks very healthy. Well, let's put it this way, he's still walking upright, and he's still he's still moving around, and he's still intelligent, and that's healthy. However, I will say, one of his eyes is not working. It's the same as the other eye. But his mind is still as sharp as a tack, I tell you. And I love that Ralph Nader said to never become cynical, never become a pessimist. You must always believe in optimism. You must always believe that better things are possible in our country and in our world. You must always do what you can to make change. That was just an absolute thrill ride to see. And also a thrill ride to see in this film was Mr. King of Rock and Roll. Well, that's the wrong word to use. Mr. Creator of Rock and Roll, Chuck Berry. John arranged for Chuck Berry to be on this program. And John Lennon discussed with Mike Douglas that how Chuck Berry influenced him and and the other rock stars of the 50s who influenced John Lennon. And he was praising Chuck Berry to the hilt for his songwriting, saying that he was the first one to make I'm sorry, Freudian slip, the first one to have social commentary in his rock and roll songs in the 50s. Oh, God, just seeing John Lennon praise Chuck Berry was amazing. And then, of course, John Lennon performed on stage with Chuck Berry, performed the song Memphis, Tennessee, one of the best Chuck Berry songs. Oh, that was a thrill ride. And then Chuck Berry was there while this woman, Hillary Steinleaf Hillman, a macrobiotic chef, was on the show. And they discussed what a macrobiotic diet looks like, and then made a meal on the show. It was such a thrill ride to see this. I knew for years that John and Yoko were into the macrobiotic diet, but I've never heard it discussed like this before. This was absolutely thrilling. And oh my god, it was an absolute thrill and just incredible to see John Lennon with Mike Douglas talking about his childhood. He discussed how when he was 4 years old, his parents deserted him, and his aunt Mimi took care of him. And then as a 16-year-old, his actual mother spent time with him like a friend and taught him about the banjo and about music and about chords. That is until she was killed by an off-duty police officer. And according to John, this did not make him hate police officers, but he did say this. He had a chip on his shoulder because of this, and it's a good thing this was 15 years after John's mother was killed, because I'm just so happy that John was able to discuss this in a way where he was not disturbed and was able to talk about it freely. Probably because this was a year and a half after he had the primal scream therapy. And primal scream therapy is where he reverted back to his childhood state and learned to feel the emotions he felt as a child. And after this, of course, John Lennon lashed out at his dad and lashed out about his mom, who was no longer with him. And it was through this that John learned the truth about his parents after his dad told him that. But anyway, it was just... And it was so refreshing to see John with Mike Douglas talking about the state of the Beatles, and he was asked the frequent questions about a possible Beatle reunion. And he was so calm and so happy. And John told him that the four of the Beatles, despite being embroiled in lawsuits at that time, were very cordial to each other and loved each other. And I didn't know that at that time, in February 1972, Paul was having dinner with Ringo, having dinner with George, seeing John once a week. I didn't really know all this before. This was so incredible to learn. And Yoko was doing these art pieces on the daytime show with a teacup, where she put it back together after it was broken, and they drew on this piece of paper, and then they called that art. And John was telling everyone in the audience, "You're all artists, even if people don't tell you you're an artist." And she gave Mike Douglas a box of smiles, and in the box was a mirror where he smiled. And John Lennon told the story about how he met Yoko back in '66 at the Indigo Art Gallery. It's a great story, and you can tell how much John loves telling that story about needing to pay an imaginary 5 shillings. It's funny. And there was this singing duo on the daytime show. I cannot remember their names for the life of me, but they had to really fight hard to the director of the daytime show, of the Mike Douglas show, to sing this important song called "We Are the Children," which of course was all about children of the day and how children of that day were of all races and of all backgrounds, and it was controversial for the time. And I gotta say, I was on cloud nine seeing George Carlin, possibly the greatest person who ever lived, on this Mike Douglas show, discussing his background at that time, discussing about how he wanted to become an actor, but then realized he'd rather be a comedian. And of course, I know that 19 years later, he did become an actor in Shine Time Station, the children's show, where he was Mr. Conductor, a magic little man who told the stories about Thomas Tank Engine. And then he got a thrill out of that role. So it's a heavy story. And seeing John perform on that stage live was a thrill. This was 1972 when John and Yoko used the backing band known as Elephant's Memory, on their albums. On her album, her solo album, and the album Sometime in New York City, where they both had songs. That was an absolute thrill. I can't say I loved Yoko's yodeling. I will say she was a decent singer in this film. I will say that. There are some songs by Yoko that I like, and there are some that I despise. I will say that. I will say I really enjoyed the documentary footage of John Yoko just walking around on what appeared to be a forest. I don't really know what it was. I enjoyed all of that. They were both extremely attractive at this time. I'm not going to lie. They were a very attractive couple. Like Paul and Linda. They have that in common. And also, it was great to see the interviews of every participant, of every person in this documentary in the present day. You saw Ralph Nader in the present. You saw this producer of the Mike Douglas Show in the present, whose name escapes me. You saw Vivian Reed, one of the singers that was on this show, in the present day, and she was fantastic. You saw, there was this man whose name I also can't remember, that did this appearance on the show using biopsychological waves to make music. It all went over my head because I don't know the I don't know the advanced jargon he was using. I don't know about all that. But this film, I would absolutely give a 4 out of 4 star rating to. This might rank as the best documentary of its kind. The best. I don't even know. It's just one of the best documentaries I've ever seen in my entire life. If I can, will see this documentary film many more times. Please, whichever company owns this, please give us a DVD and a Blu-ray release of this. I know it's on Apple TV. I will watch it there many, many times. This is something I will enjoy many, many more times. Oh, and when John and Yoko took questions from the audience, that was that was really a thrill. Someone asked John about his thoughts on the latest Wings album. And of course, at that time, the latest Wings album was the first Wings album, Wings Wildlife. And usually at that time, in 1972, John was making snide remarks about Paul's band Wings. Here he was being very kind, saying he liked a lot of what was on the album, but that clearly Paul and the band could do better. Now, to my ears and to my mind, this was a very loving and very kind comment from John, since we've heard about various interviews from John Lennon where he would say very rude things about Paul and Wings. But we both know it's not really what John thought. John, in private, was very jealous of Paul and Wings and liked them a lot. And we know that he was this close to being a member of Wings. Well, I shouldn't say member, but being on the Wings album, Venus and Mars. That almost happened, but then he went back together with Yoko, and he decided not to do that. But just imagine that had happened. It would have been one of the most incredible things ever. And, oh man, this was a trip. This movie was a trip to Cloud 9, which is a George Harrison album that I love. But I keep saying Cloud 9 because it's true. I was on pure euphoria seeing this film. I was captivated by John Lennon and Yoko Ono. Two of the most beautiful people inside and out. And to see George Carlin, one of the greatest people ever alive in this film, and Ralph Nader, again, one of the greatest people ever alive. He's such an inspiration. This was a great night. Thanks, Mom and Dad, for joining me for this. That was great. And I just got such a thrill of seeing John Lennon again, and especially to see him so happy. John had some miserable times in his life. And when he's happy, I'm happy for him. And it's incredible to see this man who made me so happy be so content and happy and joyful and euphoric. It was amazing. And I will be watching this again. And I'm gonna end this review now before I melt into a puddle of glee. So thank you for watching.